Counsel to the President Kellyanne Conway. And Kellyanne, welcome back to Fox News Sunday.
Good morning, Bill.
I have a number of issues to get through. First on Epstein. Can you assure the accusers that their claims will still be pursued?
What I can assure them is that the Attorney General took action immediately when he learned of the death of Jeffrey Epstein, and there is an active investigation. I can't really comment on that any further. And I think that those victims should have justice, and they've been looking for justice for many, many years. And I really can't comment beyond that. I think that this was the ultimate macabre final episode to a man who clearly was an evil monster doing terrible things to young girls.
Why did the president then retweet that Clinton suggestion?
I think the president just wants everything to be investigated. As your reporter just revealed just the day before, there was some unsealed information implicating some people very high up. And I'm not going to repeat their names. You already did that. I'm not saying anything beyond that, and I won't. But I will say, Bill, that there's always this rush to, we need transparency, we need accountability when it involves fictional accusations like collusion with Russia to swing an election. This seems to be very concrete in that Jeffrey Epstein has done some very bad things over a number of years. And so let's continue to investigate that. I don't think that somebody's crimes and the accountability for that necessarily perishes with them. We know that the law can allow for many different investigations. Maybe there are co-conspirators, maybe there are not. But again, it's an active investigation. I think everybody should be at least relieved when an Attorney General takes the action swiftly, as Attorney General Barr did yesterday.
Okay, let's see where that goes.
He's disturbed by this death, and let's see where it goes. It's really new. This all happened within the last 24 to 28 hours.
Understood. And we should go slow with this. Just back on the retweet quickly. It's clear what he was trying to say, wasn't it?
I think the president just wants everything to be investigated. And, trying to connect the president to this monster from years ago, where they're seen dancing in a video, versus other people who were actively, I suppose, flying around with this monster on his island, which was known as Pedophilia Island. Perhaps there's a public interest in knowing more about that. But again, this is all speculative, and it's not for me to go further than where the DOJ and FBI are right now. But you do hear different people asking questions, and they want to know who else was involved in Epstein's crimes or even just activities. And I guess that will be revealed in time.
Okay, let's move to guns in America. What a week it was. The president said this on Friday at the White House.
I think I have a greater influence now over the Senate and over the House. I think we can get something really good done. I think we can have some really meaningful background checks.
Yeah, the first part about that comment where he says, I have greater influence over the House and the Senate. Well, what is his plan to influence, to use that influence now, Kellyanne?
Well, the president has been actively talking to Republicans and Democrats on the matter of background checks and just being able to have meaningful, measurable reforms that don't confiscate law-abiding citizens' firearms without due process, but at the same time keep those firearms out of people who have a propensity toward violence. When the president signed into law Fix NICS in March of 2018, that was a big deal because Fix NICS would have prevented those stronger background checks and data information sharing between federal and state authorities would have prevented Sutherland Springs, Charleston, South Carolina, any number of these mass shootings where these people had felony charges. They should not have been able to procure a firearm. And so this president signed into law something that was not done by the previous administration. I know you're going to have Congressman Ryan on later. I mean, ask him why no legislation of any import was presented by Speaker Pelosi or the Democrats when President Obama was there, when they had a veto-proof majority in the Senate. They could have passed things, and they did not.
Congress Ryan. But just back to the question about the president. He also said on Friday that Mitch McConnell is, quote, totally on board. Now, in a radio interview on Thursday, Mitch McConnell said this in his hometown.
The president called me this morning about this. He's anxious to get an outcome. And so am I. We'll be front and center as we see what we can come together on and pass.
What he talked about were background checks and red flags. But yet Friday, Republican Senator John Barrasso was quoted with reporters saying this. He said, I've got a lot of concerns about the due process component of red flag laws. I don't want to punish law-abiding citizens. That's the #3 Republican in the Senate. So then how is the party on board, Kellyanne?
That's all reconcilable. It's exactly what I just said. We want to make sure that people who should not have firearms don't. And I think the fact pattern in Dayton, that mass shooter who's now dead, is really very compelling to many Americans, Bill, in that they say, how in the world can somebody who has a rape list for girls, a kill list for boys, a history in high school where some of his classmates, schoolmates were afraid to come to school, that then when he becomes an adult, that information does not follow into his record so that he legally procures a firearm. So most people look at that, right, left, and center, and apolitical look at that and say, how could this happen? So I know the FBI is very focused on domestic terrorism. They're very focused on mass shooting. They're very focused on information, analytics, technology to help them. But that has to go across federal, state, and local law enforcement so they can share more information. We can protect people's civil liberties, privacy, constitutional rights, and public safety all at the right time. But I predict that this president, President Trump, is the president who will get this done.
Okay,
he will have
has
more
suggested
meaningful, measurable background checks.
He has suggested things in the past on background checks and then reversed himself, too, Kellyanne.
No, look, we've got Republican senators publicly saying, therefore, some type of background check now. That's Rob Portman of Ohio, Susan Collins of Maine, Lamar Alexander of Tennessee, Mike Braun of Indiana. You're talking about members of the Republican Senate who have come forward and say, let's take a look at this. You know that Chairman Graham, Lindsey Graham, and Dick Blumenthal of Connecticut have these red flag laws. We have to take a look at what the final product is. We're looking at that. The Fix NICS violation is being put forward, I believe, by Toomey Coons, the Democratic Senator of Delaware, who's endorsed Joe Biden. You know, well, that's right. But the Fix NICS is important because it would have stopped. It should have stopped some of these mass shooters in the past. But, you know, this president did what presidents do. He went and he visited the victims. He went and thanked law enforcement and health professionals. He talked to many of the survivors, many of the victims' families. He and the First Lady expressed their condolences. He tried to heal a nation. He came out Monday morning and in no uncertain, unequivocal terms denounced hate, bigotry, racism, and, yes, white supremacy. And he will continue to do that. But, you know, when people say do something, we need to do something that's meaningful that will stop these mass shootings, not something that makes everybody feel better, that makes us all safer.
2 minutes, 2 topics. North Korea, the president said he received a letter, a 3-page letter from Chairman Kim, said that on Friday, tweeted this on Saturday. It was a small apology for testing short-range missiles, and as his testing would stop when the exercises ended. I look forward to seeing Kim Jong-un in the not-too-distant future. He's tested missiles 5 times in 2 weeks. Why would you entertain the idea of meeting with him?
Because the president has made very clear he would like there to be denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. It was former President Obama who told President-elect Trump, North Korea will be your most vexing, challenging issue. So this president dove in from the very beginning. He's met with Kim a few times. He has sanctions going on in Korea, North Korea, everything stays the same. There are sanctions in place until we see irreversible, verifiable, complete denuclearization, and we don't see that yet. But some of these short-range missile tests also, I'm informed by our NSC, do not violate the Singapore Agreement. And the president has made talk about transparency and accountability, tweeted out that after the South Korea exercises are completed, that he and Kim can get back to the negotiation table. This president's also dangled in front of Kim a more economically prosperous, more free North Korea for his people. So that's up to Kim.
Okay.
And when this president walked away from what he considered to be a bad deal several months ago, everybody was shocked. How can he do that? He does that every time he doesn't see a good deal for America, and he didn't see seriousness of purpose there. But he wants to continue to talk to President Xi about trade, definitely get a vote on USMCA.
But there is no
so
meeting. There's no meeting on the
completed.
Schedule now, correct? At the moment, there is not.
Not at the moment, no.
Okay.
But those can come together fairly quickly when the time is right.
Understood. Lastly, on the campaign on Friday, the president said this about Joe Biden.
Joe Biden is not playing with a full deck. This is not somebody you can have as your president. But if he got the nomination, I'd be thrilled.
Do you believe, or does the president believe, rather, that Joe Biden will be his opponent?
Well, it's possible. I mean, there's still 23 or 24 of them running. I saw in the latest Quinnipiac poll released this week that 20 of the Democrats were at least below 1% or at 1%, and a couple more at 2%, including one you're about to have on to your show. So I'm just reading the polls and telling you that no matter how much the Democrats are attacking President Obama's vice president of 8 years, Joe Biden, for being out of touch and for working with segregationist Democrat senators, for not being able to say a couple of numbers, 6 numbers to text to, of really the only one out there who seems to be propping up Obamacare, which has left 28 million plus Americans with no health insurance whatsoever. It may be Joe Biden, it may be someone else, but it doesn't really matter because they're all stuck raising their hands saying they want to give health benefits to illegal immigrants, that they want to have Green New Deals that cost $32 trillion and get rid of airplane travel and cows. They're stuck saying that they want Medicare for all, which is socialized medicine that would, apart from the monetary cost, the moral cost of making us all wait for care the way those veterans 5 years ago died waiting for care. They have to run, they think they're going to run against Donald Trump. They're running against the Trump economy also. They're running against the Trump deregulation. They're running against the fact that America is now the world's largest net exporter of natural gas and oil. They're running against this big boom in manufacturing and small business ownership.
Sounds like
and they can't do that. Running against a president who signed into law something President Obama and Joe Biden did not, which was fix NICS, which actually would stop a lot of these mass shooters. So whoever it is, they have to really defend socialism now and government-run things. But Joe Biden is being attacked from within. He's being attacked by Kamala Harris and Cory Booker.
That's what primaries
and
are
others,
about.
Because they see him as a serious threat.
And that's what elections are about, too. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you. Allow you to get back to your family on this Sunday. Thank you. Kellyanne Conway with us today.
Thank you, sir.